From Long Distance or Long Distance 2 is a poem by the English poet Tony Harrison, published in the 1981 collection Continuous, 50 Sonnets from the School of Eloquence. It has 16 verses divided into 4 quatrains or 4-verse stanzas. The first, second, and third quatrains follow an ABAB rhyme scheme, and the second-person perspective of the speaker comments on his father's grief and denial. The fourth quatrain follows the ABBA rhyme scheme, and the speaker shifts to the first-person perspective of the poet himself, dealing with the grief of his parents' death. The poem is written in the iambic pentameter, with colloquial language, and is a Meredithian sonnet as it has 16 verses, a form named after the Victorian poet George Meredith. Don't forget to subscribe. The poem starts with the speaker talking about how heartbroken his dad was after his wife died. His dad loved her so much that even after she was gone, he kept doing small, caring things for her, like warming up her slippers or putting hot water bottles in the bed where she used to sleep. He even renewed her transport pass as if she might still need it. These actions show that he couldn't accept that she was really gone. It wasn't just forgetfulness, he chose to carry on like she was still with him because that helped him feel close to her. The speaker has come to terms with the loss, but his dad hasn't. Even after a couple of years, he's still holding on. He has created a kind of imaginary world where she still exists, and he finds comfort in continuing his daily habits as if she were still there. It helps him fill the emptiness she left behind. The dad's use of warmth, through things like gas heating and hot water bottles, symbolizes how cold and empty he feels inside since she died. It's like he's trying to warm up the sadness. The fact that he kept her transport pass active might also hint that maybe he hoped she could come back or that she was on some kind of spiritual journey. These small, seemingly strange actions show just how much he loved her and how lost he feels without her. He isn't just keeping memories alive, he's trying to bring her back into his world in any way he can. In the second stanza, the dad doesn't like surprise visits. You have to call before coming over because he needs time to hide the things that show he's still grieving. It shows that even though his way of grieving might seem unusual, he knows it's not seen as normal, so he hides it. He's embarrassed to let people see that he hasn't moved on, even with his own son. He thinks others, especially his son, might judge him for still being so emotional. But the speaker actually isn't judging him, as he just hasn't found a way to tell his dad that he understands. Because they don't talk about it, there's now this emotional distance between them. So even though the father's actions might look irrational, the son seems to understand. He sees that his dad's strange routines actually make sense in the context of such deep loss. In a way, they're both silently carrying the same grief, and maybe they're the only ones who really understand how painful the mother's death was. In the third stanza, the father doesn't want his son's doubt to mess with the story. He's telling himself that his wife is just out running errands and will come back any minute. He clings to the sound of her key in the lock like it's a promise that she'll return. That belief, even though it's not real, gives him a reason to keep going, to do the everyday chores, and to find some purpose in life until he dies and can be with her again. Even though earlier, it seemed like the son kind of understood or at least didn't judge how the father was dealing with grief. This stanza shows that the father might have been hiding just how deep he was in denial. He couldn't let his son's disbelief get in the way, because if he did, the whole illusion might fall apart. But if we look closely, it also suggests that the father knew she wasn't coming back. He just couldn't bring himself to accept it. If he admitted she was really gone, all his coping strategies, like pretending she'd just gone to get some tea or would walk through the door any minute, would collapse. And he wasn't ready for that. So, this isn't a story about someone who's lost touch with reality. It's about someone who knows the truth but chooses not to face it, because pretending she's still alive hurts less than accepting that she's dead. In this final stanza, the rhyme pattern changes, signaling a shift from the father's grief to the son's. Unlike his dad, the son sees death as final. He doesn't try to soften it with comforting lies or illusions. To him, death is the end, and that's all there is to it. But even though he believes that, he still holds on strangely, dealing with the grief of losing both his parents. He writes his father's number in a new phone book and still calls it. That small, irrational action mirrors his father's way of grieving, even though he said he wouldn't do the same. It's ironic. The son criticizes his father for not facing the truth, but in the end, he does something similar. He knows it's pointless that his parents haven't just gone out shopping, but he still dials the number. Not because he thinks someone will answer, but maybe just because it keeps a part of them close. So, just like his father, the son's grief shows up in small habits that don't make logical sense but feel necessary anyway. At first glance, From Long Distance looks like it's about a man reflecting on how his father couldn't move on after his wife died. Even 2 years after she passed, the father was still doing little things for her, like keeping her slippers warm and renewing her transport pass. as if she was going to walk back in the door at any moment. However, the speaker tells us up front that he doesn't share that kind of belief. He says plainly, life ends with death, and that is all. So from the start, we think the speaker is being more rational and maybe a little cold. But then comes the twist at the end. After his father dies, the speaker finds himself doing something strangely similar. He admits that he still calls his father's old phone number, even though he knows it's disconnected. He knows it makes no sense, but he does it anyway. The poem shows us that grief can make people do things that don't seem logical. The father's actions of warming slippers and prepping the house aren't just about being forgetful. They're acts of love and care, even if directed towards someone no longer there. He knows, deep down, that she's gone. That's why he doesn't want people, especially his son, to drop by unannounced, as he needs time to put away her things so he doesn't look foolish. But this shows that he's not delusional, just not ready to let go. There's a really touching irony here. The speaker criticizes his father's denial. But when his father dies, he ends up doing something just as irrational. He knows his parents aren't just out shopping, a verse that cleverly echoes his father's earlier excuse for his mother's absence, but he still dials the number. This small, habitual act of grief becomes his own version of the slipper warming ritual. The poem starts with the speaker observing his father's grief from the outside, somewhat detached. The language is clear and observational. But as the poem shifts, especially in the final stanza, the speaker's tone becomes more intimate and personal. He moves from he to you, speaking directly to his father. That shift pulls us in emotionally as it shows how grief breaks down the boundaries between observation and experience. So, while grief might seem irrational, this poem suggests that it's a completely natural and loving response to loss. Both the father and son behave in ways that don't make sense, but they feel right.